Here we go with part 2 of our interview with Dion Wilson, discussing comic books, NFTs. This is a follow-up to last week's episode.
We're even going to learn more about the metaverse, blockchain, and Web 3.0.
You know, these could be kind of complicated topics, they have for me, but that's why we needed to have him back for part 2, right?
That's right, and we can imagine with all that's going on in the world of marketing creativity, there's going to be much to learn from part 1 and part 2.
Hi, everyone. Hope you've been having a wonderfully creative week. I'm Rod Jones, and we celebrate what people love to do creatively by giving them a voice so you can learn from their experiences in life.
Yes, and I'm Angie Jones. Welcome to Thought Road Podcast. We invite you to subscribe wherever you listen, and we focus on sharing with everyone how they can think, be, and live more creatively with their own passions.
Okay, Angie, so tell us more about our guest today. This is part 2.
That's right. Our guest today is Dion Wilson, and we're having him back for part 2, like Rod said, of our conversation with him. He's the founder of Rastar Technologies, Hero Ledger, and Titanium Comics.
I know Dion is very knowledgeable and has some interesting opinions on NFTs and the metaverse, to say the least, and protecting creative intellectual property. But let's hear your quote, and I'm anxious to see if you can make it fit this episode.
Yes, I actually did. So, okay, here's the quote. The wisdom of the crowds has peaked. Web 3.0 is taking what we've built in Web 2.0, the wisdom of the crowds, and putting an editorial layer of it on truly talented, compensated people to make the product more trusted and refined. And that is by Jason McCabe Calacanis. And he's an entrepreneur, angel investor, author, and a podcaster.
You know, I've heard of him, and I think this quote is excellent for this episode. But why don't you share with all of us a little bit about who this gentleman is?
Yes, I wanted to look him up to give you a little more info about him. And I looked him up on Wikipedia. And this is what it said. It says his first company was part of the dot-com era in New York, and his second venture, Web Blogs, Inc., a publishing company that he co-founded together with Brian Alvey, capitalized on the growth of blogs before being sold to AOL, and he's an angel investor in various technology startups.
You know what I like about Jason?
Yeah.
He's a fellow podcaster.
Oh, that's true. He is. Well, let's go on and listen to what Dion Wilson has to say in part 2 of our interview.
Hi, Dion. Welcome back to round 2 of your interview. You shared so much with our first interview. We were really excited to see if we couldn't have you back. And you know what? You agreed to come back. So that was fabulous.
Hi, Dion. This is a first for us at Thought Road Podcast because we're really glad that you agreed to come back for a second interview back to back to continue the conversation.
Hey, Rod and Angie, I appreciate you guys having me back. You know, knowing that I'm the first person you've interviewed twice.
Yes.
That's cool. You know, setting a little bit of a trend there. I like that. And I really enjoyed our first conversation. I'm definitely looking forward to the conversation.
You shared some really interesting information, and that it just made sense to have you back. But, although we're going to encourage everyone to listen to that interview, and so far we know a lot of people are very interested in it because they've told us they are, but it might be helpful, Dion, if you would reshare just a little bit about Titanium Comics, Rastar, and Hero Ledger.
Absolutely. So, again, in 2010, I started Titanium Comics. That was my foray into the indie or independent comic publishing scene. And about 5 years into that journey, I began to see just how many creators and talents there are, not just here in the US, but globally. And I began to question what value I was really bringing to a market that already had really great characters and stories. and creators. The creators are great too. Mm-hmm. And so I then began to say, well, the lesson that I learned early on was, to be valuable, you've got to solve problems. Mm-hmm. So that's when I started to formulate what would become Raster Technologies, but formulate a solutions business and looking at the problems that independent creators were having, really getting to the most important, issues that they have, mm-hmm. and thinking about what would be the vehicle to solve those problems. And so that, 2015, new team, new mission, new goals, and that brought us to Raster. And it brought us to a point where we've now created Hero Ledger, our first blockchain-based application mm-hmm. and marketplace for comic creators and individual artists to really take advantage of the technologies that are out there to help with their long-term needs.
You came up with a phrase. In fact, I think you guys trademarked it, comic assets. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So, yes, that is a term we created. And I like to, get to the bone marrow there. It's a fancy term, really. It was a term to differentiate how we were talking to creators and what we were talking about compared to what's talked about. And essentially, a comic asset is any IP that a creator designs that is intended to be used in a comic book. It can also be used in, motion comic or a physical comic book, in an animated, film or story. Mm-hmm. And essentially it's going to be the characters. It's going to be the background images, graphic designs, logos. And when we talk about an asset, we're really talking about production assets. So things that are going to be used to produce some type of media entertainment. Yeah, that's what a comic asset is.
Okay.
Well, as a follow-up on that, you have a good question, Angie.
Well, I know that you wrote an article about the multiverse, comic assets, and NFT asymmetrics. Tell us about the marketplace you've created for ownership of real artistic intellectual property.
Sure thing, Angie. So just to give an idea here, non-fungible tokens, mm-hmm. I want to state this first. I have to do this disclaimer. Non-fungible tokens have great utilitarian value. Unfortunately, the current hype cycle we're in, we're not able to really see what their complete, or I should say, what a decent utility they can be at this time. Is your NFT providers and platforms are selling and marketing the idea and the process in a very linear way. Art NFTs in particular are really about being collectibles. And if you're lucky, you could make a lot of money on them. Mm-hmm. But there's new information out that shows that the values have gone down some 50%.
Oh, really?
But to kind of cut over, oh, yeah, absolutely. To cut over to what we're doing, when we talk about Hero Ledger, we talk about comic assets. We're really talking about production value, not collective value. We're talking about associating the digital file to the actual work itself, not a representation of a representation of a representation of the work. Mm-hmm. Where we're talking about, on our side, when we talk about comic assets and we talk about Hero Ledger as a marketplace, we're talking about a tool that hits several touch points: licensing, auction, selling, buying, brand recognition, monetization, effective collaboration. These are things that are not just, trends. And I think that in some ways they're kind of trendy, but they are the need. They work to fulfill the needs of comic creators today. Mm-hmm. So really there's some differences between, what we do and the NFT market. The NFT market, when we talk about art, is really just focused on, a digital representation that might be worth something. We're not talking about what these creators are doing in their regular day-to-day process of, whether they, paint on oil canvas and need to sell those, or they're, again, creating those comics and they're, putting that comic out each and every month as a series. They speak more towards something that's novel and not towards helping those creators to really take advantage of the business that they're in.
Very well put. And
yeah, that is.
I envision someone who creates comics and he's sitting there and he's doing his illustrations and then he's illustrating for a comic book or for other media. Do those comics actually take their work and convert it to an NFT and then try to market it that way?
Well, if you're referring to our system, it doesn't quite work that way. But for NFTs, that's going to be really a process that the software developer or whoever's facilitating the development of that NFT and the marketing, and the design of it, they're going to have their own way at that. I couldn't tell you because there are a number of ways you could essentially do that. But for our system, what I can tell you is that a creator who has many iterations of a character or a background image or even a script, they're going to largely put that on the shelf. And we know that it's not making any money for them there. They know it. But, they're thinking of, they're kind of playing it forward. They're thinking about what they do now and where that can take them as opposed to what they did. And so we're saying there's so much value in what they've done. Let's put that into a marketplace where it can help to make someone else's production more effective or more efficient. It can be seen and recognized. It can make them some money. They can license it. And so we're really about that. We're about the creator having more control over what they do and what they have and getting the most out of it. It's kind of like George Washington Carver and the peanut, all the different inventions that came from it.
Oh, yeah.
We believe in treating the comic book that way. When we looked at the business very early, when we were in that, that period of forming Raster and solving problems, we recognized that the industry of comic books had gone so far away from comic books. It was into everything else. And we felt that we would have to come back to the very instrument that, that has the value, that is the centerpiece for all these other things that are happening, such as, the movies and conventions and all these things. It's given of itself and it's lost a lot, I think. And so when we come back to it, we realize that every character, every word, every, visual effect, it's valuable. It has social and it has financial value. And so much so that it almost makes the price of a comic, or I shouldn't say the price of a comic, but the production price of a comic, what the creator pays.
Right.
It makes that, kind of fail in comparison because one character could make you millions, essentially. And a comic, even when it sells, hundreds of thousands of issues, which doesn't happen today, it still won't necessarily do what that one work inside of that entire book could do. And so we said there's some magic there that we want to really learn about and create a method and a formula and give that back to creators so that they could take advantage of it.
And they're taking advantage of it because you're also helping them license their creative assets.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things when it comes to licensing, when it comes to a lot of these processes, they are mired in legal representation, cost, a body of knowledge that most of us don't know and probably won't have time to learn. And when we get right down to it, our ability to transact with one another can be straightforward. And we're living in a time today where it is about direct to consumer. And so if our consumer happens to be a manufacturer of T-shirts and they need a character to go on that T-shirt,
that's licensable.
Why not create an environment where we can make it easy and accessible for everyone to get what they need and make those exchanges through a platform. I mean, we do it every day when we shop on Amazon or, we use a program like Canva or anything else.
Before I get into the next question, because you kind of touched on it in the answer that you just gave us about smart contracts, it's another term that you and your partners use, smart contracts. What is that about?
Yes. Okay, so smart contracts, and we didn't create that term. I have to to bring that forward. Yeah, we didn't create the term smart contracts. Smart contracts are programs that were created a long time ago. In fact, I believe even before this time period we're in that we refer to as distributed ledger technology and blockchain. But those are basically programs which are responsible for managing transactions between, one or more people and some type of digital representation or digital asset. So a smart contract, essentially, you can program it to be aware of time. It can have a duration, the time to start and the time to finish, an amount to be paid and to who it should be paid to and where it should go. They're fairly sophisticated in a sense in that they literally manage the contractual process of the way that people would without people, essentially. And so smart contracts underlie most distributed ledger platforms and, tokens and
tokens. You mentioned tokens, and I think you also use the term tokenized.
Right. Yeah. To tokenize something simply means to, take something that exists physically or even something digitally and give it a digital representation. That's one of the definitions. Obviously, tokens exist as two-factor authentication. Anytime you see on your computer or online and it says, hey, enter your mobile device, your mobile phone number, and we're going to send you a number and you're going to input that number after you enter your password. That's two-factor authentication. Those are tokens. Anytime a token is an item of recognition, a means to, get from one point to the other in a sense. And so when we talk about tokenizing an asset, whether it's a comic book or a character, we're talking about putting it with a layer of code where a system recognizes it and then works to manage it at that point and make it available for any users that is programmed to do so.
Okay. I mean, the reason why I asked you that word, actually, I needed to know more about it, but I know our listeners, whenever I ask you about some of these terms, it helps them have a better understanding or kind of grasp some of the things you're saying, which are all very interesting. The term metaverse was coined by Neil Stephenson in 1992 science fiction novel Snow Crash, where humans as programmable avatars interact with each other and software agents in a three-dimensional virtual space that uses the metaphor of being the real world. I had to read all that. I know you have an informed opinion on how the word metaverse is being tossed around today. And virtually all of our listeners and all the people we've had on the podcast have all talked about that, if not on the podcast, off the podcast, because there's a lot of confusion as to do they embrace it? Don't they embrace it? We'd like to know what your thoughts are.
Well, I thank you, Rod and Angie, for that question, because it is really something that needs to be addressed and has been addressed, in fact, but it's going to take the curious to, and the skeptics to really take a look. When we talk about things like NFTs, metaverse, smart contracts, the blockchain, distributed ledger technology, we've been getting this picture, a very specific picture from the media. And as humans, we need something to work from. We need to, as an organizational psychologist told me years ago, we have to put a face to things. But sometimes when we do that, we do it to our detriment. You see, blockchain-based technologies, distributed ledger technologies, metaverse as being a next stage are based on principles. They're principles oriented. So when we talk about a blockchain, when we say the word blockchain, we use it as an umbrella term, but it doesn't properly represent the entire landscape of distributed ledger technology. But that word really symbolizes a set of principles. And the same thing can be said for the word metaverse. Metaverse is not a virtual reality space. Metaverse is a set of principles in software design, in collaboration, in transactions, okay, and the results they yield. A gentleman by the name of Tony Parisi wrote I think, the most succinct message and blog about, metaverse. And the name of his blog it's on Medium. It's called The 7 Rules of the Metaverse. And essentially he breaks down the 7 principles. And when you understand it as principles, you're no longer looking to go out and buy a VR goggle and, plug into this place or that place or this, this group's widget or that group's widget. You are looking for a specific result in how you transact, in the tools that you use for those transactions, as well as collaborate. So that we've been getting a lot of hype where more information is needed. And let's be honest. I mean, I imagine somebody's probably going to sleep listening to me.
Well, I have to say one thing about the metaverse. We all know who's out there promoting it and pushing it out into the universe.
Yeah.
And that's, that's okay. More power to them. But what I think it has done is it's kind of dummied down the term. And I can understand why you would do that. So it's more readily digestible by people just to say, oh, well, the metaverse is a way that I can share what I'm doing when I'm playing golf or something. And it's way more complicated than that. And you also mentioned blockchain. Do you think you could give us just a real quick, because I know our listeners, not everybody knows what blockchain is. Could you just give us a real quick definition of blockchain?
Well, yes, I can give you a really fast one. A blockchain is a database. It's that simple.
I understand that.
It's really that simple. But there are other complexities that go along with that. You see, it's the type of database that it is, because there are several in the world, in the ecosystem of databases. There are all types of databases that do all types of things. A blockchain database is pretty specific, and they can vary. You can have different types or different architecture styles for your database, and those databases not only just are used to store information, but it's how they not only process information, but, provide it, different things that they do with the information. And the different types of information that they utilize. Okay. So a blockchain is a database. Yeah.
All right. That makes sense.
Okay. That's a real simple way of putting it. You hear so many things about blockchain now, but I don't know that I understood it as that way.
Well, it's always associated with some specific agenda or program.
Right, right,
so
exactly.
You have to kind of go through the weeds there a little bit.
Yeah.
But, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, we know that you and your associates have developed a program that virtually any creative person could benefit from, Dion. But we're not here to sell your service, but there seems to be some definite advantages over NFTs, as you stated earlier. Can you give us some comparisons on that?
Absolutely. Off the bat, licensing opportunities for both sides of the deal.
Mm-hmm.
NG, if you have a, t-shirt company and, you manufacture these t-shirts, but you feel like just putting those t-shirts out there plain is not going to work, then you're able to come to Hero Ledger and you're able to go to that marketplace there and license an image of some type to include. And that creator has arranged it so that the pricing, the time of use, the use case itself all works with their business model and hopefully yours,
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That's one. The other is that Hero Ledger, when, our focus is on comic creators, the independent comic creators, but we see that the way that visual media and music even are created are similar to the way that comic books are created. And so, they all have, I should say, some very universal parts in producing their works. Mm-hmm. And so we see how Hero Ledger can be of advantage to not just the comic industry, but indie gaming, film and television, cosplay, even sports. So that's another area. Our platform is about using the current technology that's available to the individual in a way that allows them to make more decisions about what they have for themselves, manage it for themselves in ways that will get them the best business outcomes and even social outcomes that they would typically want to receive when they, use their products or even work for someone else.
If let's say I have a t-shirt company and I'm looking to license some characters, comic book characters, would I come to your company?
Yeah, we hope so. Yeah. The idea is that you wouldn't so much come to the company, but, it's the same thing. If you were to ask the question, well, I need to store some of my files, would I go to Google? No, you're going to access them. And for characters, you're going to access us through Hero Ledger. So that's going to happen online through the application. We're in the process of becoming distributed. And that's actually a process. In other words, when we talk about being distributed, we're basically saying that you will not need to rely on our central system to run the program. You will be able to run the program very similar to how people participate with the blockchain, right? The first blockchain. It's a distributed system where you don't have to rely on one server and one group of people. There are so many users that each user's participation and access to the ledger assist every other user. And so we're working towards that as well. But right now it's centralized and you will be able to log on. You will be able to access through your mobile device online or your mobile device and use the system for, again, buying, selling, licensing. And then one of the things that we're going to add in the future is auctions.
Oh, that's nice. But I could go in there and I could search a character based on a profile that I might want to use, even the animation as part of a TV commercial?
Absolutely. So
has Netflix called you yet?
No, they haven't yet. We do look forward to talking to Netflix, in fact. No, I mean, we really do. It would make sense
because everybody's looking for
new fresh
material.
Yeah.
The content. Everybody's looking for content, and it looks to me like you would be presenting some content that never has really seen the light of day. If a creator has been creating this for the last several years, and he's got a bunch of stored images or whatever from film clips, everything on computers, it is just sitting there basically collecting dust. You're giving it an opportunity. This is what I understand. You're giving it an opportunity to get out in the world, and people have the opportunity to license it or buy it outright, whatever. Is that correct?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better, Rod. I think you covered it. The Hero Ledger marketplace is like any other online marketplace that we are used to using. The seller is going to input, their data, their information about the product, and it's going to have a representation in the store. The buyer, the licensee, is going to see that information and pay for the use or the ownership. And at that point, that transaction's been made like, we go to an Amazon and buy, an item there. Same thing. I think this is a little bit faster than Amazon in that these are digital goods and there's no need to send anything in the mail. Mm-hmm. So you get it a lot faster. You don't have to depend on mail. You're just really dependent on bandwidth. So yes, and we believe in both sides of the equation. So we definitely want a lot of people there to sell, but we also are having conversations with people who buy and license because, again, there are a lot of opportunities for them to speed up their process and also lower their cost in their production. When things are already done for you, it just makes it easier.
Yeah, that's rich. Very rich content.
Yeah, and you have those features. Yeah. Absolutely. You have those features that you can, filter, based on genre, based on, product types and, get to what you need.
I know a lot of our listeners and ourselves included are artists. And right now I'm thinking of one particular sculptor whose work is incredible. And that's a whole beautiful process that she goes through in creating them. And I think there's something that would look absolutely perfect on a t-shirt. And they actually are characters in themselves. Each one of her sculptures could really be a character. Would that be somebody your firm would represent? I'm not sure. How does somebody get involved with you if they want to?
Well, as an example, if they want to contact us to understand how their artistic work can be bought, licensed, or sold through Hero Ledger, they definitely can reach out, info@raster.io. But let me state that we function from a place of the same files that everyone else uses. So text files, art files, image files, video, audio. Now, you mentioned sculpture, and we know that, they're not as ubiquitous as we, thought they were going to be in 2015. But of course, there's 3D printing. Mm-hmm. And those 3D printing files are everything from CAD files to other types, but they're image files. And so our system deals with image files where it can be included in a comic, that particular sculpture you mentioned, or there could be a replica as a 3D print. So there are opportunities for 3D printing of the visual items that are represented as files in Hero Ledger, in the marketplace.
That's a great answer. So I know there's a few people I know that are going to be listening to this. They're going to love that answer.
Definitely.
Absolutely. I mean, we try to see, our focus was on solving long-term problems that the independent comic creators around the world face. So, we had time to think, and we didn't take that responsibility lightly because a lot of people were consulted, a lot of mistakes were made. So there was a whole process.
Sure.
So that we could, get the idea down where, like I've said, these creators have been around really for almost 100 years. Mm-hmm. They've existed as long as some of the largest brands. Not, consistently that way, but they've existed in and around the same times, and come and gone, of course, but as small groups.
Sure.
And they're going to be around another 100 years.
Yeah.
Maybe another 1,000.
And their content is evergreen.
Absolutely. So we wanted to create solutions that would be with them along their journey and create solutions where they didn't have to be as dependent on
it looks like
the large industries.
I know you put a lot of effort into this, you and your team, and you have created the solutions, and it's going to be exciting to see how everything evolves. I want to ask you this, because Thought Row Podcast is all about encouraging creative thinking and the execution or development of creative thoughts and ideas. Kind of goes with our name. Yep. What has your life's journey taught you, Dion, about being creative?
Wow. I would say, what has it taught me about being creative? It's taught me that there's another part to the person, without, I guess, being, sounding too, religious or spiritual. It really is. I mean, I think it's a spiritual part to us. I think it's our creativity really allows us to evolve. It allows us to take things that, are around us and reshape them to new things. And that causes new experiences. And I think through new things, new experiences, we gain, we grow. And that growth could lead us to just a really phenomenal place.
Right, so, that's a wonderful answer.
Such a good answer. Yeah.
Thanks.
It really is. Well, for some of our listeners, much of what you've shared with us today is going to require a little bit of processing, I think, because it's so much information. Could you sum up your philosophy on protecting and perpetuating intellectual properties? Sure
thing, Angie. So this is the rule that I work from. I don't think that any business that's not a law firm or an individual that's an attorney should overemphasize that one process or another is going to protect their intellectual property. Mm-hmm. So where we function from is the one place that I believe is legally safe, and that's attestation. It is our job to help creators to register their works, to account for those works, and in turn, that record will help their legal team to prove their ownership in the court of law. We believe that that is the only place that the true ownership of intellectual property can be determined, as in by a judge's word. Anything else is a process that helps to protect, but cannot fulfill that on its own. There are too many moving pieces there. Mm-hmm. And so we believe that attestation is one of a really great one and a really necessary one, and one that we can provide for, pennies on the dollar.
Mm. Okay. That's really good info.
I think it's great info.
Yeah.
Dion, I know for you, it all started with your love of comic books. And when people listen to our first interview with you, they'll have a better understanding of that. But ultimately, that led you to developing a formidable way of protecting creativity. Looking back now, is there anything you would have done differently as you look back over this journey? I think we all do that.
Oh, yeah.
That question is really interesting. Just to give some context, if I can, I'll be quick. On one of my first podcast interviews, I was asked about going to the past or going to the future. And I like to go to the future. Mm-hmm. I think that we do learn a lot from processing what has happened in the past, so long as we can remember it properly. But we can learn a lot. I would have to say that if I had done anything different, then I would not be at this moment, perhaps. Now, if we really believe in multiverses and,
Yeah, right.
Parallel dimensions, then there are a number of things that could have happened and the results can end up the same way or different. So I don't say that there's anything that I would change. I definitely wouldn't say that, because the outcome, I would have no idea what the outcome would be. Maybe me saying that, well, if we had done more of this or less of that, that maybe the outcome wouldn't have been Hero Ledger. Maybe it would have been, say, just a weekly podcast, or it would have been, a t-shirt business or something, And I'm not knocking any of those things. Those things are, all necessary. We need those things for commerce.
Right.
But you just never know where you change something in the past, what will be the result in the future. So I don't really do that. I like to stay with, okay, I did what I did and I'm where I am. And so if I want something different in the future, then I have to exercise a different set of skills, use a different, maybe different resources in my network and, planning in the present to potentially get the outcome that I want in the future. Mm-hmm. So that's how I would answer that.
Well, that's a great answer, because we should all be thinking forward instead of in reverse. And sometimes it's just trial and error. You test one thing, you get a lot of feedback, and that feedback is extremely valuable and helps us make better decisions. And then we hopefully leapfrog from that decision to the next one. And then we look back maybe a tiny bit and say, wow, that was a good decision. And now we're moving in the direction that I had hoped. Also, I think what happens when you started this, you probably did immediately recognize how incredible it ultimately could be. I think you're probably looking at it now and saying, this has been quite a journey. We've really accomplished a lot and a very valuable service, it appears to me.
Well, thank you. Yes, I am always in awe about the team that we have, the multiverse team, which is our forward-facing business. And it's building the community, having those discussions with creators and potential partner brands as well as existing brands. And the Raster team, which is developing that software and literally pushing to accomplish our 25-year plan. Without that team, I don't think, any of this would be possible. Without you guys, this wouldn't be possible, So, again, I can't name anything in the past that I would change, but I'm glad we are where we are. And we do look to be here for a long time and have considerable impact in the future of the comic and art ecosystems. For sure.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. Yeah. Go ahead, Edgy. I know she's got a question.
Well,
she's dying to ask.
I'm trying to ask you because I really want to know your answer. And that is, what is the best definition when it comes to yourself? And what would you recommend to others when it comes to perseverance?
That's a tough question. Don't ever ask me that question.
I know it's hard, but
I like that question. I was just thinking, the one side of my head says, find a room where you can go and scream that nobody can hear you, come out and straighten yourself up, no problem. But I would say, how you define yourself and, take that personal and that private time to yourself to interact with that identity, that version of yourself in its organic environment. There's a part of each of us, maybe even several parts of each of us, that has its own environment it thrives best in.
Right.
And the part of myself that I reserve for myself and you share very little with others, if at all, I put that self into an environment, a mental environment and sometimes a physical environment. It means traveling to certain places too, that it is most comfortable and that it, is able to commune with that environment, with self and anyone in that environment. So preservance is about that deeper you getting the time that it needs to just be healthy and whole. And to do that, you have to identify what part of the self that is and what environment it's at home in, and make sure that you're connecting it to that, not necessarily all the time, but as much as you possibly can.
Great answer.
That's a really good answer. Thank you, Dion.
Thank you.
And I knew it was a good idea to have you on a second time.
Yes.
And I also want to say, Angie and I are so glad we had the opportunity to have you the second time on a podcast. And it's probably important to talk about the fact that your vision for one of the best ways to utilize technology for producing, protecting, and giving control back to many forms of creativity, I think that's kind of exciting. I don't know of any other platform or anything else that's going on out there. And when we're fairly aware of what's going on, you really have created something special here.
Thank you. Thank you, Rod. Thank you, Angie.
Yes.
For having me and for seeing what we want creators to see. And we want them to appreciate themselves. What we're seeing is that there's a lot of, just naturally, because of how they've come into the industry, there's a lot of kind of promotion of the larger companies over their own creativity. And we want them to get back to, get back to self, get back to what they're doing and understand that there's just a tremendous amount of social and financial value there. And so we're just creating tools that are an echo chamber, not echo chamber, but an ecosystem, but an echo chamber of those things. The world wants to see something different. And it's not going to come from the larger companies unless they work with us. But, it's not going to come from the larger companies.
There you go.
So true.
Well,
it's going to come from the individuals.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we might have to have him on a third time.
I know, maybe.
But hey, I did it with Comic Crusaders. Have me back whenever you guys want. I'm happy to talk about other aspects of technology. We've got a collaborative platform that we're working on for comic creators, and we've got some, platform we're working on for comic collectors. So there's a lot more to the multiverse cloud environment, and I'm happy to talk about those things or whatever area of business and art you guys want to talk about.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dion. It was so good to have you with us today. And for our listeners that would like to know more about you, we'll have links for Dion under the show guest tab on thoughtropodcast.com, so everyone can learn more about him. And please connect with him on social media and check out his website.
Yeah, there's a lot of information here, and he has more on his website.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you again, Dion.
You. Absolutely.
Also, if you're enjoying our podcast, both Rod and I would really appreciate you buying us a cup of coffee. Just go to thoughtro.com, scroll down a bit, and you can find that link right on our website on the homepage.
It's really easy to do, by the way.
Yes, it is.
And all the money we receive goes to our production costs.
Yep.
And primarily because we want to keep our show commercial free, and we want to continue to bring you the best quality content with great guests.
That's right. Thank you for listening to Thought Row Podcast.
I'm really glad you tuned in today. We hope you enjoyed the thoughts and ideas we shared with you.
We post a new podcast every week, so remember to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. So it's bye for now from my husband Rod and I, wishing